Welcome to Build for Bharat, where you and I learn from the builders and makers for Bharat. I'm your host, Sanjay Jain. Today I have with me Dr. Lalitesh Katragada, who is the founder of Indiehood. Lalit, welcome to Build for Bharat.
Hi Sanjay, thanks for having me.
Lalit, we started working together about 18 years ago at Google on Maps for India. We came up with the idea of letting users build maps data. This led to digital maps for 170 countries.
180.
Right. 180 countries, including China and India. What are the insights we can take as you build for Bharat?
So I think Sanjay, there are, MapMaker was a very deep journey, as you know. I think there are four fundamental insights. One is the idea takes a while to mature, right? The first idea, first paper, I remember sending it to you in 2004, right? And you were crazy enough to say this makes sense. And there were, long story short, there were three insights that are, I think, fundamental. One is, this whole idea of Web3 and DAO that people talk about. It's not just vaporware. It is really possible if you do it the right way, right? And users are at the center of it. People are really capable of contributing very high quality data and creating platforms by themselves. And Map is a platform, as you know, right? And it was demonstrated very early. Unfortunately, it has not taken off as a means of building platforms, but I think that's a fundamental insight. Not only are people capable of, they are willing to, and they want to. Right? There were questions that will people do it? Will they want to do it? Can they actually, geospatial guys used to train 4 years to do this, but will an average person do it in a few seconds, right? So that was one. And the second insight was that if it only comes to life if you make it real time. And to make it real time, you have to have a way to edit a map database in real time, and you have to have a way to render it in real time. Both of them were not possible. I had never been done until then. And the audience doesn't know, but you wrote the rendering engine, which was revolutionary at that time, and I wrote the editing engine. And even at Google in those days, nothing was edited and published in real time. MapMaker was the first, right? And the third one was that machine learning coupled with people's wisdom built into it really works in fighting spam and keeping an environment clean. And it really does matter. We actually had designed it into the system on day one. It was not an afterthought. We launched with a very high quality, curation system where spam fighting was part of it. So those are the three fundamental insights.
So Lalit, if we break it down into three different pieces as you have done, the first was that users can create really complex data. Maps data is complex, and this was something which people had not thought of as being possible earlier. By creating the editor, we let our users create data for their own use. And that ends up being very, very beneficial to everyone around, particularly their communities. This is similar to the path that Web3 or DAO projects are on, except that the governance models are different. The second, we started out with rendering on the client side.
Correct.
And you had all these JavaScript rendering of the map data. And then there was one point where it became real time on the server side. And then suddenly you had these beautiful tiles come up.
Yeah.
And at least in my mind, as you're working on the project, that was a very important turning point, because it moved us away from where people were editing data to where they were actually editing the map itself.
It was a visceral experience of editing the map itself.
Correct. And that fantastic user experience flipped people's minds in so many ways that I think this is what actually led it to being successful. And we had a lot of people who would then go out and build maps data for any place they knew about. And that actually led it to grow quite rapidly.
Correct.
The third comes to this, that when you make it very easy to do something, people will misuse it, and you then have to build in a protection layer to prevent that. And that was really the whole ability to recognize what is good data and what is bad data. There was a key part of the platform that enabled that. And so those are the three different pieces that helped it become a platform, and much more than what we had originally imagined it to be. I mean, you wouldn't have had Uber or the just-in-time delivery that we see across India if we didn't have all of that.
Correct.
So, this was a really incredible achievement. And particularly given that this was way back, more than a decade ago. So, coming back to the question that you raised around governance, how do you think about that today? If we had to redo this, what would you think of differently?
So I think, we tried it even then, which is, see, when a community creates data, and I don't think Maps is just data. Maps is actually a platform by itself. Even though Map looks simple, actually 40 layers of data that get built in, and we render it to make it look simple, but it is nothing but simple. And things like turn restrictions and so on are essentially people programming what you can do and what you cannot do on the roads, right? People were doing, very simple programming at population scale, right, to essentially create this what computer scientists call a directional graph, and that was being created in real time. I mean, I like to think of the map as a planet scale canvas, which is highly interconnected, which people are editing. So it's not trivial to do, because it is not like you're putting pictures everywhere, you're just drawing in disconnected lines. Everything has to connect and mesh and so on. So it is very complex, and of course you have to get the coding and computer science right, you have to get the governance right, but what I mean is governance of the curation community. The curation community, the machine learning, all of that has to be right. And of course, the people who create it, like, in which case it was our team, should get some value out of it. But the bulk of the effort, I would say majority at least, was because of what the people contributed, right? It is natural justice to me that if people contributed, the map should also equally belong to the people. And that is the one thing I would, do if I were to do it today. We tried it, and of course, because of various corporate issues, we were not able to convince everybody. I mean, it's a large corporation, convincing everybody is not easy. And everybody means well. Everybody, in the whole ecosystem means well, but we were unable to, pull that off. But we had partial successes. We were able to give it to the UN. It was used for 100 disasters and so on. So there was a lot of gratifying use cases of it for public use and so on. But I think that should not have been the exception, that should have been the norm. This should have been a public map by now. Even if it was 50% owned by the community, 50% owned by Google, it should have been a public map. That is the one fundamental thing I still think is a failure of mine for not having convinced the powers that be. Even though 2004 to 2012, like a 8-year journey, right, should have been enough to figure this out, but we couldn't.
I think it was a little too early for that then. But today, if we were to do this, that's a wonderful lesson to say that if people are contributing to the success, they need to actually be stakeholders. They need to be part of the governance.
Yeah.
And that's an important thought as we go ahead.
Be stakeholders. Yeah.
So to our Build for Bharat community, this is what we would do today.
It's music to my ears, this coming from a VC. You're no longer the product manager of MapMaker. You are wearing the VC avatar. Right. And I think, I'm glad, for forward-thinking people like you are thinking on the same line, Sanjay. I vehemently agree with what you just said.
Lalit, thanks for bringing this up. It has been a pleasure talking to you about this project that we did together so many years ago.
This was probably, the most enriching work journey of our lives. And hopefully it is not the last one. So look forward to a few more when we solve for Bharat.
Thanks, Lalit.
Thanks, Sanjay. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in. This has been another episode of Build for Bharat, where we feature bite-sized discussions with the architects who are building India's inclusive digital future. Build for Bharat is a part of the Bharat Inclusion Initiative, where we support entrepreneurs who are building for Bharat with inclusive products. We are currently looking for companies to join the 6th cohort of the Financial Inclusion Labs. We are on the web, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Do write to us with your suggestions and requests to feature a guest or a topic. Build for Bharat is available on all major podcast platforms: Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast fix from. We'll be back again with more insights soon. Subscribe now to never miss an episode.